Hey, welcome to another episode of the DTC Insider podcast. I'm Brian Roisentul, your host, and today I'm going to interview Zach Frantz. He's a serial entrepreneur who started his first business, and listen well, at the tender age of 9 years old. And I was playing with my toys. I can't believe that. Since then, he has started multiple businesses and is now the founder of Wildland Coffee, where he's changing the coffee game for everyone who is traveling and spending time outdoors. That's awesome. Before talking to him, let me tell you that this episode is brought to you by BSR Digital. By now, I'm sure most of us know that customer acquisition costs are going up. There's lack of tracking attribution is probably driving you nuts. And audience sizes are getting smaller and smaller after the iOS 14, 15, and so on updates. If that wasn't enough, there are other factors such as the recession and supply chain issues, making it harder than ever to grow your e-commerce brand. That's why we need to understand that it's really important to level up the marketing and design the solid strategy, as what used to work doesn't anymore. Here at BSR Digital, we have been helping countless e-commerce brands that want to scale their business to the next level through paid ads and email marketing for over a decade. If you want to learn more about us, visit us at bsrdigital.com, or you can email us at hello@bsrdigital.com. Now, as promised, I have Zach here with me. Hey, man, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Brian. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm really curious about your story. I always ask this to every guest, but now in particular, how come you started your first business at 9 years old?
Yeah. Geez, sorry. Growing up, I like some of my earliest memories are actually cooking with my mom in the kitchen, and one of the things we would always cook a lot were cakes, and for some reason, I wanted to start a cake business, and I think it was the idea of like I liked the idea of taking something in my head and like making it a reality. And so at the time, so this was 1999, I made a website using Yahoo GeoCities, which doesn't exist anymore, but I think it was like the very first drag and drop like website builder, maybe ever. And so I had a website where like you could literally order a cake through my website. Now I
Uh,
didn't have I didn't have any like payment processing, but you could like put like the size of the cake and what you wanted and like the type of cake and you would hit go and like it would send me an email. Um, I never actually sold any cakes except for to my neighbor, and then the $50 seed money that my mom gave me ran up, and I had to declare bankruptcy. But yeah, it was just like the idea of building something that I had come up with in my head was like really appealing, and so that's like kind of when I got the first taste of my of entrepreneurship. Throughout high school and then college, I started a couple of businesses that truly like never really went anywhere. After college, I started a company called the Beer Barrel, which was like it was like a 1 gallon mini keg. That was when I got my first taste of don't trust what people on Alibaba say because it was a patented product, and I they like the company that ended up like threatening to sue me because I was like ripping their product off. um, so yeah, so that's like kind of the short version of how I got here. I got into the coffee industry because I was sick of using my French press when I was camping, and I it always kind of felt like a dumb problem. I was like, well, like this is like it just seemed like there should be a good solution for easy coffee when you're camping or on the go. And I thought, well, tea comes in tea bags. Like, couldn't you just put coffee into a tea bag? Like, wouldn't that basically be the same thing as a French press, right? You're steeping the coffee. And in that moment, I had never seen anything like what I had just envisioned in my head. And I swear to you, I was like, I told myself, I was like, Zach, you're the smartest motherfucker in the world. Like, you're about to like be like Steve Jobs. I went home and I Googled it, and it turns out I was not the first one to think of this idea. I thought I was really genius, and it turns out I wasn't. But I bought the other products, Folgers actually being one of them. I had no idea Folgers has done this for 40 or 50 years. And I thought the products were fine. Like they were not good, they weren't bad. But like the biggest thing was I felt like they were going after the wrong market. All the other companies that were doing it and kind of still are doing it right now, they're all branded as like very generic coffee companies, not for any specific like person or use case. And as I thought about who would adopt this product the fastest and be willing to pay the most money for it, it truly was people who were either like outdoors or traveling. Because when you're in those use cases or settings or contexts, your habits are broken. And when you're making coffee at home, that routine is cemented. You're really price conscious. Like no one tracks how much a cup of coffee is at home, right? Even if you buy an expensive bag of coffee, like you're not tracking how much that individual cup just cost you. And so I felt like the easiest way to get people to adopt a new format and a new habit would be when their traditional habits were broken. And so I started Wildland Coffee 2 years ago.
Wow. Thanks for sharing your story. I have a few questions on that because one, I believe I was wasting my time at 9 years old now. So thank you for ruining my childhood. I'm just kidding. I I'm curious about the lessons that you learned. I mean, of course, when you look back, even though you were a child, and of course, you probably didn't notice it back then, but you probably can think about it now. How did it make you feel? I mean, what happened with your website, and what are some of the lessons that you learned from that experience?
Well, I don't actually remember how it felt like when I shut down my fledgling business, but it's actually a really interesting question. No one's ever asked me that before. I think one of the lessons looking back at those like early times is like I had no idea what I was doing. Like I don't even know how I found Yahoo GeoCities, but or how I did any of the other like all the other businesses that I had started or tried to start. Like it's just about like taking action on what you think you want to do. Like it doesn't need to be like this like massive thing. Like it could just be as simple as like how do I build the website? How do I source a product? Like yeah, with the beer barrel like I got into some legal trouble, but it's just about like taking action and like what's like the first step that you can do. Like and if a 9-year-old can take a step to build a website in 1999, a 30-year-old in 2023 can absolutely do that, right? So like I don't think it's way harder than starting a business is way harder than people think, but it's also way easier at the same time, just because of like all the advances in technology. Like it's more available and easier for anybody to build a business today than it ever has been in the history of the world.
Exactly. So I think that, I mean, what you say is really important. And to add on top of that, you learned between quotes and really between quotes what it's like to fail or for a business idea not to work. I say between quotes because for me failure is something different, but probably what it feels like when you take chances and it doesn't work. What happens? Well, it depends on how many risks you took, right? But then when you were a child with a $50 seat, as you said, probably if it failed, it was okay. For many companies, of course, if it doesn't work, it's probably the end of the company. But that's what entrepreneurship is about, right? To take chances in calculated ways, but always to be curious, to explore, and to defy the current the status quo. It's like things are not meant to work the way they currently work, so I want to improve them, and I will do my best to see how I can do it, right?
Yeah, and I think that this is obviously way easier said than done, but how someone perceives failure, like the perception of failure is often what causes the anguish, not necessarily the failure, right? There's like a Buddhist saying or something. It's like the root of all suffering is like expectation or is like wanting. I don't remember what like the quote is, but um, like when you're a kid and you fail, like you haven't grown up to like create all these expectations or these creating the stories in your head that like if I fail, I'm a bad person, right? Like when you're 9, I don't think I had that story in my head. Whereas like now, if my business failed, I'd probably take it a little bit differently than when I was 9. But like, I think it's much healthier to take failure as not like a good or a bad thing. It's just it is. It's like, hey, it didn't work out. It doesn't mean that like I'm a bad person or I suck at what I do. It's just like, okay, like sometimes things just don't work out, and like it is what it is.
Yeah, exactly. So the other day I was taking I'm learning, how to sail, some kind of type of boats. And I had
Hmm.
my first lesson the other day, and everything that needed to go wrong went wrong, and not from my end, from the instructors, right? It was, I don't know how to pronounce this in English probably, but it's like we 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 touched, let's say, the a piece of land while we were in the middle of the lagoon, because it's of course an artificial lagoon we are doing the classes in, and there are many constructions and moving, and machines working, building new neighborhoods. Those are private neighborhoods I'm talking about. So the lagoon is full of, many things, below water. So even in the first class, they were mentioning that in the theory, but then in the practice, things happened. So unexpected things happen. And I remembered that last weekend too while I was doing this, because unexpected things can happen. But the good thing is that if they already happened to you, you learn, you move on, and you try to avoid
Yeah.
to bump into the same rock again, right? So you mentioned something else besides this that got my attention, and it's the fact that there were many, coffee companies. Obviously, there are many coffee companies, but they were not talking to a specific audience. So, beside the obvious, why do you think, maybe for everyone, for somebody listening or watching this, why do you think it's important to, or a benefit to avoid talking to everyone and niche down and solve their problems only?
Well, I'm a big believer that if you're and but I didn't make this up. Like if you're trying to be for everybody, then you're for nobody, right? Like and then you're and because then if you're for everybody, now I'm competing against Starbucks. And who's going to lose? Me, right? Like it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that I'm going to lose to Starbucks. But like if I'm competing for the person who's camping, now I can beat Starbucks because Starbucks is not talking to that person. Starbucks is not branded for that person. Starbucks is not creating products and emotions and stories for that person. So if I'm competing for somebody that the biggest players are not, now all of a sudden I have a competitive advantage because Starbucks is they sell little via packs that a lot of people in the outdoors use, but a lot of people but again, like now I'm just competing against one Starbucks product in a very specific use case, and I can create advantages versus that or I can create advantages for that customer for Wildland versus using other products.
Yeah, why I was trying to remind a book I read about that, and it was like a blue ocean strategy.
Yeah.
For everyone who didn't read it, I strongly recommend you do, if you want to learn more about how to niche down and find blue oceans and not red oceans, like crowded oceans versus more prominent oceans for your brand to grow. But yeah, that's a great one. I totally agree. The riches is in the niches, in the niches, as they say, right? So,
Yeah.
um, now this is, uh, you know, we discussed that during your life, you tried and you learned, move on, tried the next big thing, you hit rock and you moved on. What happened with this business? I mean, uh, were things always easy, or are you in a transition, let's say?
Well, things are not easy right now, so things have never been easy. um, it'd be nice if it was. Um, so we we started off very focused on direct to consumer. And some of my previous experiences had told me, and just my bank account told me that like I didn't have quite enough money to be spending a ton on Facebook ads. And so I was like, so I had this like vision of like growing the company through ambassadors. So like I recruited like a bunch of ambassadors, like, like influencers. And like after a few months, maybe it was like 6 months, I was like, this is never going to work. Um, and so then we transitioned to selling on an Amazon, and we spent a bunch of money on like an Amazon launch, a lot of paid ads. And then we realized that there's not a ton of organic demand for this product on Amazon. And so, through our launch strategy, we were able to rank pretty high for like certain keywords in the instant coffee space, or like the bagged coffee space, or those kind of like subcategories, right? But then once we stopped juicing the launch with like people buying the product, like kind of your standard stuff, right? Um, we pummel, or we tumbled in the ranks, because yeah, we were like number one for that keyword, but like people were unwilling. Maybe not unwilling, but like on Amazon, like we found when people are searching for instant coffee, they're buying instant coffee. Like they're very unlikely to then go buy a different format of coffee when they came in looking for instant coffee, as one example. And so, the at right now, again, the organic demand for this product on Amazon is like, it's pretty weak in the grand scheme of things, right? And even our competitors, like our biggest competitors, aren't even doing like that much. Again, in the grand scheme of things, I would be happy if I was doing as much as they are, but like it's not like transformative, like levels of money. So, um, so again, we're still on Amazon. Like, it's fine. It's not a huge focus. Like, I'm glad we're there. Um, so then we started going after outdoor retailers. Um, there's not a ton of outdoor retailers in the United States. Like REI, I would say REI, just in terms of the number of doors, they probably have, I don't know, 25%. If you took all of the stores, maybe REI has 25% of them. And so there's like REI, there's some regionals, and then there's like um, in independent shops. But again, there's like not that many of them. And so we've been pretty successful at getting into outdoor shops. But like the sell through is like, it's fine. It's not great. It's a lot of people aren't looking for coffee when they go to an outdoor shop. Um, and again, people don't really, they're, even when they are looking for coffee, again, they're not looking for this format because they don't know it exists. So I'm kind of painting this picture here of like trying a bunch of different things and just realizing that the demand for this product right now is like very little. Like everything that Wildland does is like manufacturing demand, which is really hard or really expensive, or both. Um, and so about 6 months ago, we decided to bring the manufacturing in-house to reduce our cost of goods sold. And for a long time, like I thought it would be like really expensive and like really, really hard. And I mean, it is expensive and it is hard, but it was like reasonable. It was something that we could swallow and like justify, right? Um, and so with that, um, let me actually back up 1 second. As we were trying to get into outdoor retailers, we also started to get into with some like hospitality companies. Like, we had like a hotel client, and then we had some like Airbnbs and some van rental companies. So as I'm starting to like again realize that like this outdoor retailer thing is okay, but it's not gonna like take us to where we want to go. I started looking at like our accounts, and I thought, well, we've had some success with like hotels. And the nice thing with hotels is you don't have to worry about sell through, because they're just giving it to their guests in the rooms. It's like, drink it. This is your coffee. And so I thought, okay, well, fuck, like let's just go after more hotels. Um, and this was like right around the time when we started to do the manufacturing ourselves, and doing the manufacturing ourselves allowed us to offer a price point and keep the margin that we have that would sustain the business and allow us again to acquire hotels, because at the volume that they're buying at and they're giving it away, they're expecting lower prices. So that we made that decision about 6 months ago, and about 2 months ago, we actually like started like products started coming off the line. And so now we're looking at like private label. We're getting deeper into hospitality. We're also getting in with some like corporate gifting and like custom branded merchandising types of distributors. So like the future of the company is probably going to look very different as it does today. But like we're not getting rid of the Wildland brand. Like that vision is still alive. The idea is to actually use the profits from these other initiatives to then fund a better direct to consumer approach with like ads and much better content and stuff like that. But that just takes a lot of time or a lot of money, and so we're going to use the profits from this other stuff to then fund the Wildland brand growth. But that's probably more of like a medium term thing.
Great. Yeah, I mean, to be able to serve your target audience, you first need to be still in business, right? If you're out of business, you cannot serve anybody. So I think
Exactly.
something that many brands are forgetting nowadays, it's to keep their economics healthy, the cash flow healthy as possible in these tough times. And if there's a better way or a faster way to generate cash flow and profits, of course, that's awesome. I mean, I think that that's what a great entrepreneur does. And I think that you can still go after your vision um, once you have this figured out. And it could be, why not, another sales channel you can have for the lovers of, outdoors, or for those in indoors. I don't know. It's a different experience, right? Maybe different branding, different packaging, different whatever. But I think both can live together, and it's okay. So it's an important, I mean, did you, how long did you, you know, let's say, think about the options? It's like, should I actually go B2B, or was it like a fast decision that you took?
I mean, I'm like primarily a one person business. I have some virtual assistants. I didn't at the time. My background is software sales before I started my coffee company. It was pretty fast because one, I do a lot of my own sales. So like instead of calling outdoor stores, I just started calling hotels, and I realized like, oh, like people are like pretty interested in this. Um, the other thing is like it's not like we were doing like $100,000 a month in direct to consumer. So like if I stopped focusing on direct to consumer, it's not like I was gonna then go lose a bunch of money. And at the time, and still like we're still kind of in like the testing phase of like the business, right? There's nothing nothing has proven itself to be a scalable channel yet. And when I look at my biggest competitor, they did an equity crowdfunding round recently, so like they had to show their financials, and like they haven't found it either. So like it's like this format is like it's challenging. And so I'm still like, again, it's like, okay, this isn't working, so let's try this. This isn't working, so let's try this. There's very little opportunity cost to go try something new because nothing is like taking off into the stratosphere yet.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I completely agree. You mentioned that, by the way, you're a one-man business and you have assistants. So I would love to go more in depth on that if you want.
Yeah.
So, for instance, just for context, I chatted with, I usually chat with many awesome founders like you, and many of them have way more head count than they should, right? So it's important in these times. I mean, always, but in these times, to keep things, I mean, to do the necessary hires, and avoid, it doesn't win who has more employees. It wins who has more a more successful business and who resists these tough times. So why did you make this decision, and what kind of assistance do you have?
Yeah. So I made the decision because I was like getting really burnt out, and I was like, I can't keep doing this anymore. So I was out of necessity. And I am So I have like a few thoughts coming from different angles on this and just kind of ways to think about this. So I am not an expert in really anything besides for sales, which for a direct to consumer business is like, I'm not really an expert in anything that has to do with direct to consumer. um, so my my thought in general is, and I'm frugal, borderline cheap when it comes to my business. I'm trying to be less cheap. I think being frugal is good. Cheap is not good. But when I'm thinking about these types of things, I want to spend the least amount of money to get better, right? And so for me, because so many areas of my business are just like very raw, getting better doesn't require, the world's leading expert on whatever the thing is. Like I can get 50% better with a $10 a month VA because I'm starting at such a low point, if that makes sense. Now, eventually, I'm going to need the best person because I need to squeak out, I need to take it to the next level and I need that level of expertise. I don't need that level of expertise today. Like, I'm just trying to get a little bit better than I was yesterday. So how did I like make the decision to hire my first VA? I was making a lot of calls to hotels and having success. The definition of success, because that's super important, is people were interested in getting samples. So I would call a hotel, I would tell them who I was and why I was calling, what my product was, and I would ask for the email of the person that made that decision. And after making probably 200 or 300 of those calls, I realized I shouldn't be doing this. This is too easy. And it doesn't take Zach on the phone to have that conversation. So I went on to Upwork and I posted a posting for a VA, and this woman, she goes by Apple. I don't think that's her real name, but she goes by Apple. She's like, hey, I have a team of 30 VAs. Like, I have someone who can do what you want. So we get on a call. She brings on Shirley, and Shirley's like, yeah, like this is pretty easy. I've done stuff like this in the past. So I recorded on no, I recorded myself making phone calls, probably 4 or 5 phone calls. I wrote out a script, and she started to make the calls. So after she makes the calls and gets the email, it goes into a sequence, like using a software called Apollo, and then I do the sales from there. So once the person's like really interested, they want to talk about pricing, they want to do this, then I step in. But all the stuff before, Shirley does, and she makes like 130 calls a day.
Definitely you have, I mean, it is said 10 $10 an hour task, $50 an hour task, or thousands of dollars an hour tasks. And definitely if you can do more of the latter of thousands of dollars or hundreds of dollars an hour task versus a $10 an hour task or less than that, then probably it's a great sign for you to a great way to tell that you need to delegate that, right? So that's
Yeah.
awesome. We use
Yeah.
VAs well for similar things and do things that probably are more automated, but kind of be fully automated. So we need a VA to do that. But it's what you said, it's trying to delegate what's because BC, I think it's an old one, but many people still don't do it. And hey, we are not, I'm not perfect at it either, but to be productive is not the same than to be busy, right? So many people are busy and say, hey, how was your day? Oh, it was crazy, blah, blah, blah. I had many calls, and were you productive? That's a different thing, right? So I think that to be productive, you need to delegate the $10 tasks, right? And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. And I still do a lot of things that are like really annoying because there is like, I don't want to, again, going on like my cheap versus frugal. I'm like, okay, I'm already spending like a couple grand a month with my VAs. Like, they're making big improvements. again, like it's all about making improvements. It's not perfect. Like I still fill out paperwork that I don't want to fill out and all this other stuff. Um, but the other thing that I really try to focus on with my VAs is I want them to be doing things that are going to be revenue generating. So I try to not have them do things that are just like kind of menial, because some of those things don't really take me that much time. And again, I want them doing things that are going to be generating me revenue. So, it's kind of a give or take.
Yeah, exactly. So let me see if I have any other question for you. Yeah, I think we covered this a little bit, but it's being an entrepreneur is tough. I think it's really rewarding, but it's tough, of course. So how do you avoid it from time to time getting blinded by your own emotions, being, let's say, an emotional?
Well, I think that's one of the hardest things to do is like the take yourself out of the business, like emotionally, because it is like your baby. Um, but I have found that like when I detach from outcomes and I say, oh, like, okay, like if I wasn't the one running the business, like what would I tell it's really easy to give great advice. It's really hard to take good advice. Um, but if I can like detach from outcomes and just say like objectively, like what do the numbers say here? Or like what what advice would you give yourself? Like that's when I make the best decisions. But again, it's like detaching from the outcomes. That's like the really difficult thing to do. Um, and I don't know. I think like meditating and some things like that actually really help with being like not so emotional about your business. But yeah, much easier to say that than it is to do it for sure.
100%. So for what it's worth, of course, there are many books that talk about many awesome things to do, and we keep reading and reading, but not implementing. So I get that happens a lot. It happens to me, and it happens to many of us for sure. But there's this one, it's pretty well known in the entrepreneurship space. It's called Traction, and it gives you like the entrepreneurial operative system, the EOS. Mainly, one of the things it says many interesting things, but one of the things it says is that it talks about the lead measures and lag measures. I think it was that or the five disciplines of execution. I don't remember which book of those was. Both of them in really interesting, but it's basically when you want to start doing a diet, going from the desire to actually committing to the diet are two different things. So the lag measure is, hey, you get on the scale and you see where you're at, right? That's a lag measure, or sending a report. It's already done. Like the cash flow or the balance for last month. I don't know. It's already done. It's a lag measure. But then the lead measure, you need to be as accurate as you can with the actions and commit to those, and not saying, hey, I'm going to lose weight. For the example, I'm going to lose weight. So that's the desire. Let's say that's the dream outcome. So how many pounds do you want to lose by which date? And then the lead measures are the really important things about this. I believe that it's like those things are going to help you get there, being as accurate as possible. Not saying, okay, I'm going to eat healthy food, I'm going to do
Mhm.
exercise. No, you're going to eat these, and these calories and these meals for X period of time in the morning, in the afternoon, blah, blah, blah. You're going to exercise 1 hour a day, 3 times a week, these type of exercise. So I get it. To go from nothing to everything takes a lot of time, but starting defining a few little measures for you, I mean, for your business, at least it helped me a lot.
Well, here's like kind of a very tangible example. So this is like my to-do list, but each night I write three things that I have to do the next day. Like these are like the most important things. And it's funny how hard it is to only put three things. It's like, fuck, there's so many things I have to do. But it forces me to think like, okay, like what are like the burning things? And like actually it's funny, like sometimes like I get it wrong. it's kind of weird, but like I look at this and I was like, that probably wasn't the best like three things, right? But it forces you to like be intentional about, okay, what is going to drive my business forward tomorrow? Like, because that's like I found that one of the things that got me really bad burnout was trying to do too many things. And what's hilarious is once I started doing this, I got the same amount of stuff done, because when you're really stressed, you don't even get that much done, you know? But like making it like kind of simple and almost easy. I was like, dude, all I have to do is three things today. Who can't do three things, right? Anyone can do three things. But if you can just like nail like the most important three things, then like, you do that day after day after day, and eventually like you start to make a lot of progress. Also, doing this has helped me look at other things that I could be outsourcing to my VAs. I'm like, okay, I shouldn't have done that. That was stupid. That was a waste of time. And it was really easy and really fast. So let me have the VA do that. So you're kind of like, you're always like learning, like, okay, that was dumb, VA. That was good, Zach, VA, Zach, VA. And then I don't know, maybe in like a year, like we'll come back to the podcast and like I'll have like a team of 100 VAs and I'll be like $1 billion business.
Of course. So I mentioned a few books. I'm curious if you have any to share with the audience that you
Yeah.
love.
So one that I really love is Delivering Happiness by Tony, and I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Tony Heisa. He was the founder of Zappos, and he actually committed suicide a couple years ago, pretty tragically. Um, but it was just a great book because he like built his business in a way that like no one really thought like was possible. And for anyone who like knows like the Zappos story, like there's like some like really like famous stories of like customer service people being on the phone with people for like an hour, and just like they just did like crazy things to like make their customers happy, um, in ways that like not a lot of companies do today or even did then. And yeah, it was just like a really cool book on how someone built a business in the way that they did. It was very different. And then yeah, and then the guy like committed suicide, which is pretty tragic. But yeah, importance of mental health and importance of like putting the customer first.
Yeah. So that's awesome. Thanks for the recommendation. I didn't read it, so I'll be happy to add it to my list. I have a
Yeah.
lot. We actually put together, for those listening or watching, and for you, Zach, as well, we put together a list of books mentioned on the podcast in 2022, and we're doing the same in
Hmm.
2023. So for everyone listening or watching, everything that Zach mentioned and that I mentioned as well will be in the D2C Insider.com. You will be able to find the episode there. And once you click on the episode, you'll be able to find all the information mentioned right here, including the books he mentioned and that I did as well. Zach, I wanted to thank you for being here. I really had a great time. And I love, again, learning from people like you about your
Yeah.
stories. So, yeah, I want to appreciate that.
Yeah. Awesome, Brian. I really appreciate it as well.
Awesome. So where can people go to learn more about you and your company?
Wildlandcoffee.co, or connect with me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Great. We'll include Zach's LinkedIn on the show notes as well. Thank you, man.
Thanks.